today with Gina Zurlo, a doctoral candidate at Boston University School of Theology. Gina also works as research associate at the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary Center for the Study of Global Christianity. The point of our interview is to think about the demographics in global religion and Christianity as we begin to look forward to the General Assembly, the 10th General Assembly of the World Council of Churches. Gina, I wonder if we could begin with the following question. The 10th Assembly of the World Council of Churches will take place in Busan, the Republic of Korea. This assembly has the mandate to set the future agenda for the churches. From your experience as a demographer and from your own analysis of the churches, what do you think the agenda for the World Council of Churches should look like? This assembly sets the agenda for the next 7 years of program activity as well as worship and celebration.
The agenda for the World Council of Churches, I think, should definitely consider what's going on in terms of the trends of the demographics of world religions and global Christianity, and especially the interaction between those two. I think sometimes the ecumenical movement tends to be insular, just thinking about Christianity and not consider the wider religious context which their member churches are in. And so I would really like to see engagement between Christianity and other world religions. So taking stock of where the member churches are and what the religious contexts of those areas are, and seeing the diversity within that, because this is a global movement, and see what interaction the ecumenical movement can have with the interfaith movement. Because there has been some criticism that the ecumenical movement has been surpassed by the interfaith movement. I don't necessarily think that's the case yet, but with that kind of on the horizon, with more people becoming interested in the interfaith movement, what can the ecumenical movement do to be in dialogue with people who have a similar agenda?
One of the challenges which the churches will face is certainly the question of interfaith dialogue. I wonder how you see this playing out in the Korean context, where there's also a keen interest in mission and evangelism. Can these two live together, interfaith dialogue and a keen interest in mission and evangelism?
Absolutely. I think interfaith dialogue and mission and evangelism are not mutually exclusive. I think they can be equal partners. I don't think one necessarily needs to be subsumed within the other, because dialogue is open to everyone. That's the nature of dialogue, is that anyone, with whatever their theological leanings are, they're welcome at a dialogue table. And so you can have more progressive types and more conservative types at the same table, each having equal voice. And so those who are interested in the Korean context, for example, in mission and evangelism, can come to the dialogue table and talk with those who also have interest in mission and those who don't. And I think in doing so, they might learn from one another. They might see things from a different perspective. They might see their other religious neighbors in a new way. And so I think having dialogue be central in the Korean context is critical.
In the context of interfaith dialogue in Asia, what are some of the things you think Christian churches can learn from Asian faiths, ancient faiths, Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism?
The approach to religion in Asia is very different than a Western approach to religion in terms of religious identity. So you could have people practicing Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism all at the same time and not say, I am a Confucian, a Buddhist, or a Taoist.
So multiple religious identity. Exactly,
exactly, which people in the West tend not to understand as well. And so those who are at the dialogue table need to, in the Asian context, need to understand the fact that religious identity is very complicated, and they're drawing from a lot of different religious traditions that might not be able to easily be labeled. And so I think people who are dialoguing in that context need to be aware of the multiplicity of religious identity in that area and be able to speak to that and see what does that mean for the Christian context. Is there anything that you can draw from those religious traditions into Christianity And what does that mean for one's own personal practice of faith and dialoguing?
Can you go out on a limb a little bit and suggest what are some of the practices or tendencies that Christians might learn from other faiths?
If you think of the Confucian tradition and the respect for elders and the
that's like the fifth commandment of the Ten Commandments, honor your father and mother.
Exactly. And just because it's in the Asian context rooted in Confucianism doesn't mean it's bad. It's part of the cultural understanding and cultural identity in that area. And so I think Christians need to be more open to some of these core values, respect of elders and remembrance of ancestors and celebration of other cultural traditions in their particular countries, and not be afraid to embrace those because they're from a different religious tradition.
What about Buddhism? What can that offer Christians?
I think the emphasis on suffering and the release of suffering in the Buddhist worldview, I think could play into the Christian desire, I should hope, to also work for the alleviation of suffering in the world. I think there could be some work done in looking at the Buddhist view of suffering and what that means in the Christian theological context as well.
So moving forward in the next 7 years, the agenda for the Council should include a greater and deeper dialogue between Christianity and other faiths. Are there other areas you would say are important for the agenda of the World Council of Churches moving forward for the next 7 years?
Yeah, I think the World Council of Churches could also benefit from looking more critically at indigenous and independent movements, particularly in the Global South. So what is the relationship between what we know is the ecumenical movement and these newer expressions of Christianity in Asia, Africa, and Latin America? We have examples of newer churches joining, say, the World Council of Churches. In Africa, the Kimbangwa's Church is a member church. But that hasn't been the trend of those newer groups joining the WCC. And so I'd like to see engagement with the question of, should they be part of the ecumenical movement? If they don't want to be part of the ecumenical movement, there should at least be dialogue between these new expressions to see what does a more indigenous face of Christianity mean for the ecumenical movement, and what can these churches learn from the newer churches, and really open up a partnership between the two. So
much of your work, as I understand it, has been involved with the demographics of Christianity and other religions. I look at this book here, The Atlas of Global Christianity, which you had a hand in completing and in tallying and figuring it all out. From your perspective as an associate researcher with regard to the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, what can you say about the demographics of Christianity in relationship to other religions? Just map it out generally, if you could. Yeah, so looking at the time period 1910 to 2010, which is the time period of the Atlas, we see the demographic shift of Christianity to the Global South. And this has been well documented. Everyone's aware that this is happening. So you have the growth of Christianity in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and Oceania. And then you have the somewhat decline of Christianity in Northern America and Europe. And so that is obviously very important for global Christianity. What does that mean to be a global Christian family when we have Western theology and Western traditions and Western hymns and Western dress, but most of the Christians are in the South now? Another part of this is, again, kind of in the interaction between Christianity and other religions. Now there are new religions that Christianity needs to be engaging with. In the Western context, it's not as religiously diverse as, say, Asia, which is the most religiously diverse major area in the world. Most of the world's religions were born in an Asian context, including Christianity. Another aspect of that is non-religious movements. So you have Christianity declining in the global north because of the rise of atheists and agnostics. You've talked about the importance of interfaith dialogue for Christians and people of other faiths. I wonder if there's also a justice issue involved here. As I think of the 10th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, the Assembly theme is God of life, lead us to justice and peace. How does that theme inform your own thinking with regard to the agenda of the World Council of Churches?
Justice is a critical issue for every Christian, no matter where you are, north or south, no matter what denomination you're in or what tradition you're in. I feel that justice needs to be at the forefront of the church's agenda and the World Council of Churches' agenda. But justice looks different in different places in the world. You have different issues in Latin America than you do Northern America, than you do Asia. And so I think one of the challenges of the World Council of Churches is really having that global outlook and recognizing the fact that justice issues are different in different places. And so what does it mean for someone in Europe, for example, to be concerned with justice issues in Africa? What does it mean for someone in the United States to be concerned with justice issues in Latin America? And behind that, there's a lot of education needed. Does the average Christian in North America know what the issues are for an Asian Christian in terms of justice? Are they aware of the socio-political context? Are they aware of the environmental issues that exist in other places of the world? Do they even know what the issues of justice are? And so I think there needs to be a lot of education. I think the World Council of Churches, because they are global in scope, could be a really great body to help educate people as to what those justice issues are.
Do you want to name any of them?
Think of some of the political issues that are going on in Latin America and how we've seen Christian engagement in politics with evangelical or Pentecostal political parties and presidents, and what effect that has had on the growth of Christianity in that region, and the relationship with the drug cartel issue. What should be Christian engagement in that? It's an issue that I think a lot of people in Northern America, because we're geographically close, think about, but have no idea what to do about. What would the church have to do with that? Should the church have anything to do with that?
I think you're familiar with a number of the different global Christian movements. The World Council of Churches is just one of them.
Right.
There are also bilateral discussions between major churches like the Lutheran Church, the Roman Catholic Church. I think also of the Global Christian Forum or Lausanne III. How are these different organizations positioned to deal with some of the agenda items you've mentioned?
I think some of those other organizations are positioned well to reach their constituents, which I think is important. So you have the Lausanne people speaking to the evangelical world, and you have Orthodox communion speaking to the Orthodox, and so on. And so I think if each of these groups talked to each other first, and heard well from each other what the issues are, and then spoke to their own people, so to speak, about those issues, I think there really could be some fascinating work. Recently at the Lausanne meetings in Bangalore, I was very encouraged to see evangelical Orthodox dialogue going on. They just had, I think right now, we're having a consultation in Albania. And I think there could be a lot of fruit from dialogue like that that could feed into the World Council of Churches and other global entities. So it's coming together like that is very encouraging to me, seeing groups come together that historically haven't really.
So in terms of dialogue, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Yeah, great.
Your study,
Absolutely.
Gina, of global Christianity and other religions, as you work on the demographics of this, the two faiths that seem to be growing the most are Christianity and Islam.
Right.
How does your work figure in with the identities and even the political sensitivities of these two faiths as they deal with each other in interfaith dialogue or even confront one another in areas of global conflict?
So we spend a lot of time tracking the demographics of Christianity, obviously, and other religions, and everyone always asks which is growing faster, Christianity or Islam, as if there's some kind of race, or we need to make sure that one is ahead of the other. And I think what's important to say is that these two religions going forward by 2020 will likely be 2/3 of the world's population.
Mm.
And that has enormous implications for dialogue, for politics, for international relations, for working for justice issues. And I obviously think there needs to be more interaction between these two faiths and a greater understanding of history and theology and practices and holidays and culture and all these things. But I also would like to see greater physical interaction, greater personal contact between Christians and Muslims, and discussing how to work together for issues of justice in their areas. So, in the United States, the communities tend to be very separate. You have the Muslim community in Dearborn, Michigan, kind of this hub of Islam in the United States. But more and more people are recognizing there's a mosque in my neighborhood.
Mm.
What does that mean? Do I talk with them? But the thing is, a lot of Christians and Muslims have very similar convictions regarding some theological issues, in terms of traditional family values or working together for justice and the homeless and all of these things. You have the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. So why can't they work together? And I think that would be in the spirit of the World Council of Churches, is working together for justice and for the coming of peace. And so I think more intentional discussion between Christians and Muslims, especially knowing that they're growing and that they're becoming more and more of the global population.
So Gina, you've identified a number of issues which should be on the agenda of the World Council of Churches when it meets at its 10th General Assembly in Busan, Korea. Are there other issues that arise from your study of the demographics of global religion that you think we should call attention to at this point?
I think a really important issue is the consideration of the global church. So at the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, we count, or at least we try to count, every Christian in every tradition in every denomination in the world. And so we operate on a very strict self-identification platform. If you say you're a Christian, you're a Christian. And I think that just gives respect to every individual and what they choose for their individual belief. Not everyone in the world operates that way. And so you have a lot of Christian denominations who don't consider other Christians Christians. And from my demographic perspective, when I say there are 2.3 billion Christians in the world, another group might say, but does that include this group? Because I don't consider them Christian. And so I would love to see, for the agenda of the World Council of Churches, some kind of engagement or plan to stand on that self-identification platform and encourage other Christians to take a stance like that for the sake of global Christianity, for the sake of all those in the world who call themselves Christians and choose that label for themselves. Because I think it's tragic to have a global Christian family where parts of the family don't consider each other as part of the family. In any normal family, you wouldn't want that. And so I'd like to see the same for the global Christian